One of the things that SharePoint does very well that humans don't do so well is it waits. There's actually an action in SharePoint that waits until the value of a field changes, and you'll be using this particular action over and over again. Let's walk through the workflow. We're going to start this employee onboarding process with someone in HR filling out an entry in a list that we've created called employee onboarding. So this list sits on our SharePoint site. Somebody from HR goes in, fills out the employee's name, clicks and attaches some documentation. Then they go in and they mark the date to show that they've created everything they needed to in HR and this is ready to move over to payroll. At that point, we want SharePoint to send an email to the payroll department to say, hey, new person, go check them out, so that the folks in the payroll department can add the employee to the payroll system and the benefit system and then enter the date to show that they too have gone in and have done all of their work for this new employee. At that point, we want SharePoint to say, oh, the date's changed in that payroll field. It must be time for facilities to kick in. So at this point, the email gets sent to facilities so that they can provide an office, a parking sticker, and so on for the employee, and mark the date to show that all of their responsibilities for onboarding are done. And at this point, we'd like SharePoint to say, oh, let's let the IT folks know there's a new employee so that they can discharge all of their responsibilities. So we've gone out, we've interviewed everybody in the business, we've made sure that this is the sequence that they want this done in, and it is, and we've obtained the email addresses for the folks who we want to send these emails to. So we know that we're going to send an email to Greg in the payroll department, to Janet in facilities, and to me in the IT department. This is our very simple employee onboarding system, and we're going to go ahead now and create the workflow. Here we are in SharePoint Designer in our Lists and Libraries list. Here's the employee onboarding list. Here are its settings. I'm going to click Edit List Columns just so we can slide over and see that these custom columns, HR, Payroll, Facilities, and IT, all of them are date and time columns. I sometimes see applications where these would be checkboxes that someone from HR goes and checks that they've done something. But that's such a small amount of information that it might even be a mistake. And so whenever I need to collect information that tells me that something was complete, a checkbox is not good enough. I'm going to have somebody enter the date. I'm going to have somebody enter their date and initials, whatever it takes for me to actually know when the work was done. Why would I throw away this information that would allow me later to say how long it took for the folks in payroll to be able to complete onboarding? So right from the beginning, I usually will replace checkboxes in forms with dates. You're going to be creating custom libraries and lists over and over again if you do workflows in SharePoint. So if creating these kinds of columns or working with a list like this is something that's relatively new, I want to refer you to the SharePoint 2010 Essential Training course in the lynda.com online training library. Specifically, let me point you to Chapter 5, which is on creating custom lists and libraries. But we have our list, we're all set, and what we want to do now is we want to create a workflow. So I'm going to click Workflows. We're going to create a list workflow, and we're going to choose the list, which is called Employee Onboarding. Here's our new workflow. I'm going to actually name it Employee Onboarding, and we're going to create several versions of this in the course. So this one is actually a serial version where we have first HR, then after that payroll and so on. We're going to do a parallel version of this and a couple of others later. Remember that it's good to enter a description, who it was created by, how they can find you, what the purpose of this was, and I'm going to click OK. So the first thing we want to do is we want to wait for the HR department to say all of our work is done on this. So we're going to choose an action. You'll find it under the list actions that says wait for field change in current item. So I'm going to wait for a particular field, and the field is called HR. When I created the list, I just named these fields after the 4 departments that will need to do this work. And I want to wait for HR to be greater than another value. Now, the HR field is a date field, so I need to enter a value that's a date here. So I'm going to say any date, almost any date would do, but I'm just going to say 1/1/2001, for example. Anytime somebody enters a date in the field at all, it better be greater than January 1st of 2001. So that's our very first step, is a step wherein we will wait. Our next step then, as soon as HR is greater than 1/1/2001, I can go ahead and say, okay, once we're done waiting, we're going to go ahead and send an email. And the email is going to go, in this particular case, to the payroll department, and that's Greg. So Greg at twotreesoliveoil.com, new employee. Now, remember, I could also choose to put the employee's name in here because I have that field. And I could say, Dear Greg, or I could say, Dear Payroll Department, or I could just say nothing if I wanted to. Dear Payroll Staff, please complete the onboarding activities for, and we know we have this employee's name, so we're going to add a lookup. In the current item, we're going to go get this employee's name right there. After you have done this, or after you have completed the activities, remember to visit the employee onboarding list and enter the date under HR. Here's a link. So we could send them right back to that item in the list, and you will probably remember that we're going to do that by adding a lookup that is to that encoded absolute URL right here. More information if we wish. Now, I'm going to create an email like this several times. One's going to go to payroll, one's going to go to the IT department, one's going to go to facilities, so it doesn't hurt for me to copy this at all if I would like to. And while I can change this as I go through, I really want to make sure that I have a pretty good look on this, that the subject, for example, new employee onboarding, probably isn't going to change. And that's because later on in this course, you'll find out how you can encourage folks to set up rules in Outlook to manage this email as it's coming in. So we're going to say, okay. It's going to make sure that it can find Greg, and it did. So there's our first step. Wait for HR to be greater than this, then email Greg. And I could actually even name this step. I can click here and I can say HR done, notify payroll. It's a good name for that step. Now let's add another step, and we'll do exactly the same thing again. But this step, instead of being called Note HR done, will be payroll done, notify facilities. The next step would be, well, here's a learning moment. I actually didn't want to create this in here. I wanted to create this step outside, so I should have clicked outside. We'll just go ahead and do that, and I'll come back and delete this in a second. So this one is going to be called Facilities Done, Notify IT. And I'm going to select this step 3, and notice that it's yellow, and I'm going to go ahead and delete it and get rid of it. So HR is done, notify payroll. Payroll's done, notify facilities. Facilities done, notified IT. I'm just going to drop in and set these 2 actions in this first one again. Notice that because I'm using these actions, they're right up here. So I'm going to wait for a change in the field. The field in this case will be payroll, because it's payroll that would be done. And I want payroll to be greater than, and again, I'm just going to use that same date over and over again, whatever my magic date is. And I'm going to right here insert another action, which is to send an email. Email these users, and I'll have an email then that I can send to Janet at Two Trees, and the subject would be new employee onboarding. And I'd have some text that I would send to Janet along with the URL and encouraging her to go back to the site and enter the date when she's done. And I would do exactly the same thing for the Facilities Done, notify IT. So I'm using a combination of wait, then email, wait, then email. So in each case, when our folks have gone in to that list or library, employee onboarding list, and they've changed and entered the date that the HR work was done, or payroll or facilities and so on, that's actually going to kick my workflow to the next step each time. So wait, email, wait, email, wait, email, and so on. This workflow isn't quite done, but you don't need to hang around while I finish it. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Before I publish it, I'm going to go back out and take a look at it out here, not in the editor, but out in the settings. And remember that what I want to say is start this workflow automatically when a new item is created. I'll finish the workflow back in the editor, and then I'll be ready to go in and to publish it when I'm all done with it.